I'll never forget the day I signed the papers. At 33, after years of renting tiny apartments with paper-thin walls, I finally bought a house. Now, I know what you're thinking. Congratulations, you must have found your dream home. Well, not exactly. The place was a wreck. The online listing made it look even worse than it was: peeling paint, a roof that sagged like it was ready to give in, and a front yard that looked more like a jungle than a lawn. Anyone else would have scrolled right past it. But when I saw it, I didn't see a disaster, I saw possibility. A backyard where I could plant tomatoes and finally grill burgers on summer nights. A kitchen I could design from scratch, not some landlord's idea of good enough. For the first time in my life, I could shape something that was mine, through and through. When I told my family over Sunday dinner, you'd think I had announced I was moving into a haunted house. My mom set down her fork, gave me that look only moms can give, and said, "Emma, what on earth are you thinking? You could get a nice apartment downtown with everything ready to go. Why take on all that work?" My dad just shook his head and muttered, "That house will bleed you dry, kiddo." And my younger brother Jack, God bless him, laughed and said, "Seriously, Em, just buy a condo. You'll spend every weekend fixing pipes and painting walls. Sounds like a nightmare." His wife, Sadie, sat across from me, rolling her eyes. She barely said a word, but her face said it all. Sadie never misses a chance to remind me that she thinks she's smarter, trendier, more put together. She calls herself a content creator, though I've yet to see her actually work. To her, my decision was just another excuse to judge me. But here's the thing, I didn't care. I make my living as an interior designer. I spend my days working alongside contractors, electricians, and builders. I know what things cost, I know what quality looks like, and I know how to stretch a dollar, and this house, ugly as it was, came at a price I could actually afford on my salary. The mortgage payment was less than rent on a decent 2-bedroom apartment in town. So I ignored the chorus of disapproval, signed the mortgage, and picked up my keys. I walked into that busted living room, old carpet, reeking of mildew, walls the color of mustard, light fixtures straight out of the 70s, and felt this surge of pride: it was mine. The next 6 months nearly broke me. I painted until my arms ached. I ripped up carpet, hauled debris to the dump, and made so many late-night runs to Home Depot that the cashiers started greeting me by name. On weekends, I was in jeans and work boots, learning more about plumbing and drywall than I ever thought I'd need. Of course, there were nightmares. The electrical system? Shot, cost me thousands to redo. Then a storm rolled through one weekend, dumping rain for 3 straight days. That's when I discovered the roof leaked right over my freshly primed kitchen ceiling. I sat there with buckets catching water, wondering if my parents had been right all along. But here's the part they didn't know: I wasn't doing it alone. The guys I worked with, contractors I'd collaborated with on client projects for years, cut me deals that saved me tens of thousands. They knew me, respected me, and wanted to see me succeed. They'd charge half their usual rate, sometimes show up on weekends, just to lend a hand. Slowly, the place transformed. Fresh gray paint brightened the walls, hardwood floors gleamed after refinishing, and the backyard, once a tangle of weeds taller than me, turned into a green oasis with a fire pit and string lights. Every week, the house looked a little less like a money pit and more like a home. There were nights I collapsed into bed with paint in my hair and bruises on my knees, but I was proud. Proud that I hadn't settled for another cookie-cutter apartment. Proud that, for once, I wasn't letting anyone else dictate what my life should look like. By the end of those 6 months, I stood in my finished living room, sunlight streaming through clean windows, and I thought, this isn't just a house, this is proof. Proof that sometimes the best decisions are the ones nobody else understands until they see the results for themselves. I stood there in my living room after they left, the music still playing, my friends still chatting, but my heart sinking just a little. It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for. I'd imagined this night as the moment my family finally saw what I had built, where they'd maybe even admit they'd been wrong. For a split second, I had that when my mom's eyes lit up and she called the place gorgeous. But then Sadie couldn't help herself. She had to tear something down, even if it was just a paint color. I shook it off and poured another glass of wine. My coworkers and neighbors more than made up for the sour ending. They were genuinely impressed, asking me how I'd handled certain renovations, and even taking notes for their own projects. One of my colleagues pulled me aside and said, "Emma, this doesn't just look good, it looks like something out of a magazine." That made me smile. I went to bed that night exhausted but proud, telling myself not to dwell on Sadie's tantrum. The following week, though, I got a surprise. My mom called out of the blue and asked if she could come by. Just her. No Dad, no Jack, no Sadie. She sounded almost guilty, like she wanted a do-over. When she walked through my door a few days later, she took her time, touching the walls, opening cabinets, asking me about each choice I'd made. We brewed coffee in my new kitchen, and she admitted something I never expected. "Emma, your father and I were wrong. You saw potential in this place that we couldn't. I'm proud of you." Hearing that nearly knocked the air out of me. It was the closest my mom had come in years to saying she respected me as an adult. On impulse, I handed her a spare key. "In case I ever travel or need someone to check on the house," I told her. She hugged me, and for a while, it felt like things might actually be normal between us again. Over the next couple of months, she stopped by a handful of times, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to visit. Those little moments almost made me forget how badly things had gone with the rest of the family. But Jack and Sadie? Radio silence. Jack sent the occasional short text sports scores, random updates, but he never mentioned the housewarming or the renovations. Sadie never contacted me at all, and honestly, I preferred it that way. My dad stayed neutral, neither warm nor cold, just distant. 4 months later, just when I thought the dust had settled, my mom called again. This time, her voice had that careful tone, the one she used when she was about to ask for something big. She invited me to a family dinner, saying it had been too long. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I walked into my parents' house that Saturday, Jack and Sadie were already there, sitting at the table like they owned the place. Jack was unusually cheerful, calling me Em like we were kids again. Sadie stayed quiet, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We ate pot roast and made small talk, but I could feel something brewing. And then it came. My mom set down her fork, looked at me with that sweet practiced smile, and said, "Emma, your brother and Sadie's lease is up soon. With Jack's hours being cut at work, things are tough. We were thinking, maybe they could stay with you for a little while, just until they get back on their feet." The room fell silent, every eye on me. Jack leaned forward, his smile pleading. Sadie sat back like she'd already made herself comfortable in my living room. I set down my napkin slowly, feeling that same pit in my stomach I'd felt months earlier at the housewarming. I knew, in that instant, that the real battle for my home had just begun. I knew that smile. It was the kind she used when she was about to drop a bomb but wanted it to sound like good news. The whole table went quiet. Jack leaned back in his chair, grinning like a kid about to get dessert. Sadie straightened up, waiting for her moment. "Jack and Sadie's lease is ending soon," my mom began. "And with Jack's job cutting back his hours, things have been difficult. They've had trouble finding something affordable." She paused, like she wanted me to nod along. "So, we were thinking, maybe they could stay with you for a little while, just until they get back on their feet." My fork froze halfway to my plate, the audacity hit me like a punch to the chest. My house. My sanctuary. And here was my mom, asking me to hand it over like it was a spare motel room. I took a slow breath. "I don't want anyone else living in my house," I said as evenly as I could. Her smile slipped. "Emma, this isn't just anyone, this is your brother and his wife." "I understand that," I replied, "but my answer is still no." That's when Sadie couldn't hold her tongue anymore. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "I always knew you were greedy and arrogant. You've got all this space, and you can't even share?" I locked eyes with her and let my words land. "Funny, Sadie, because I remember you calling my house a pigsty at the housewarming. Now you're ready to live in it for free, I assume." Her face turned crimson. "Well, if it's free, I guess I could deal with it," she muttered. Jack jumped in then, desperate. "Come on, Em. You know my situation. They cut my pay by 20%. We're barely hanging on. Just help us out for a little while." I looked straight at him. Maybe Sadie should get a job instead of pretending to be an influencer. That did it. Sadie shot up from the table, tears streaming down her face in that dramatic way only she can manage. She stormed upstairs like a teenager, her heels pounding on the wood floor. Jack glared at me. "You're unbelievable. You've always been selfish." And then he chased after her. The silence left behind was deafening. My parents sat across from me, shaking their heads, disappointment etched into their faces as if I had ruined dinner, not the two people trying to take over my life. I set my fork down and finished my meal in tight, polite bites. When I was done, I folded my napkin, thanked my mom for the pot roast, and excused myself. Driving home that night, I felt sick. Not because of guilt, but because of the realization that my family didn't see me as a daughter or sister anymore. To them, I was a resource, a safety net, a convenient solution. My boundaries weren't just inconvenient, they were offensive. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, no Sunday dinner invites. It was like I had been erased. At first, it stung. But then, it felt like a relief. No more guilt trips, no more manipulative smiles, no more Sadie pretending my hard work meant nothing. Just me, my house, and my peace. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. What I didn't know was that this silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. My family wasn't done, they were just regrouping. And the next move they made would leave me staring at my own bedroom walls, painted a color so vile it made me want to scream. And that was only the beginning. That Tuesday started out like any other. I was dressed for a client meeting, portfolio in hand, ready to land a project that could easily cover a couple of months' worth of mortgage payments. When the client called to reschedule, I wasn't upset. Life happens. In fact, I saw it as a blessing I could finally tackle some paperwork I'd been putting off. Then I remembered I'd left a stack of files at home. Instead of sitting in the office twiddling my thumbs, I decided to drive back, grab what I needed, and finish the day working from my own kitchen table. It was 11:45 when I pulled into my driveway, 3 hours earlier than usual. That small decision changed everything. 2 cars were parked in front of my house, my parents' sedan and Jack's beat-up SUV. My first thought was panic, something must have happened. Why else would they be there in the middle of the day, without calling me? I rushed up the walkway, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me nearly knocked me off my feet. My master bedroom furniture, dresser, nightstand, lamps, was scattered across the living room like a garage sale gone wrong. I heard voices upstairs, loud, cheerful voices. My heart pounded as I climbed the staircase, every step heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, I stopped cold. My bedroom, my sanctuary, the place I had spent weeks perfecting, was crawling with people. 2 workers I didn't recognize were rolling paint onto the walls. My parents stood to the side, watching. Jack hovered near the closet, and in the middle of the room, like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Sadie, grinning ear to ear. "Oh good, you're home," she chirped, as if I'd just walked in on a surprise party. "We decided to freshen up the bedroom before Jack and I move in. Don't you just love this pink?" Pink. Not just any pink. An awful, bubblegum, Pepto-Bismol shade that made the room look like a bad candy store. My beautiful gray walls, the ones I had agonized over, were being buried under slaps of this hideous color. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed. The workers froze mid-roll. My parents looked guilty. Jack's face went pale, but Sadie kept smiling, like I was overreacting. My mom stepped forward, holding her hands out. "Honey, I used the spare key. We thought this would make the transition easier for Jack and Sadie. They'll be moving in soon, and we knew you'd want them to be comfortable." I could barely breathe. "I told you no. I told you all no. How dare you come into my house and do this?" Jack finally spoke, his voice defensive. "We figured you'd come around. You always do the right thing eventually." "The right thing?" I snapped. "The right thing is throwing all of you out of my house right now." The workers, smart enough to know trouble when they saw it, quietly packed up their brushes and left without a word. My parents tried lecturing me about family loyalty, Jack started shouting about how desperate he was, and Sadie crossed her arms, calling me selfish and ungrateful. But I was done. I stood in the middle of that half-pink, half-gray room and pointed to the door. "Get out. Every single one of you. Get out, before I call the police. They argued, they pleaded, but I didn't budge. Something in my voice must have convinced them I wasn't bluffing, because one by one, they finally shuffled downstairs and out of the house. When the door closed behind them, I locked it and leaned against the wall, shaking with rage. My bedroom was ruined, my trust shattered. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about paint. This was about control. My family had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let them do it again. That night, as I scrubbed pink splatters off my hardwood floor, I realized something crystal clear. If I didn't protect my home with everything I had, they'd take it from me piece by piece. And that was the moment I decided to fight back. I stood in the doorway, my chest heaving, my fists clenched so tight I could feel my nails pressing into my palms. Every word out of their mouths made my blood boil hotter. Family, loyalty, sacrifice. How I should be helping. Not one of them saw the insanity of what they had just done, walking into my home like it was theirs, moving my furniture, and smearing pink paint all over the walls I had poured weeks of sweat and love into. Get out, I repeated, my voice low, steady, and dangerous. Now. They hesitated. My mom wrung her hands, as if she were the reasonable one. My dad shook his head in disappointment, like I was some spoiled teenager refusing to share. Jack opened his mouth to protest again, but I cut him off with a sharp glare. Sadie, though Sadie had the gall to smirk. You can't just throw us out, she said, folding her arms like a child, daring me to discipline her. This is family. You owe us. That was it. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. Fine. Then you can explain that to the police. The room went dead quiet. My parents paled, Jack looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet, and Sadie's smirk faltered for the first time all afternoon. They must have seen in my eyes that I wasn't bluffing, because slowly, with mutters and glares, they shuffled past me and down the stairs. The workers, bless them, had already packed up and vanished, leaving behind half a gallon of pink disaster and splatters on my hardwood. The door slammed, and I locked it immediately. My body shook with adrenaline, but beneath the anger was something else, clarity. They weren't going to stop. If I didn't draw a hard line, they would keep pushing until they got what they wanted. So I acted fast. I called Mason, one of the contractors I trusted most. Mason, I need you at my place right now. Bring your tools. I need every lock in this house changed, front, back, garage, everything. He didn't even ask questions. He showed up within the hour, swapped every lock, and handed me a fresh set of keys. The old ones, especially the spare I'd given my mom, were now useless. As soon as he left, I drove straight to the hardware store, grabbed gallons of the same gray paint I had chosen months earlier, and went to work. I painted for hours, the fumes filling my lungs, sweat dripping down my back, my hands trembling with each brushstroke. But with every strip of pink I covered, I felt like I was reclaiming my space. By 2 a.m, the room was mine again, my color. My sanctuary. Exhausted, I collapsed in the guest room, because I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that space just yet. The next morning, I called 2 more guys from my crew to help move the furniture back where it belonged. Once everything was in place, I stood in the doorway, staring at my bedroom, and made myself a promise: never again. By that afternoon, a security company was installing cameras around every inch of my property: front porch, backyard, driveway, even the side gates. Motion detectors, alarms, and an app that let me see everything from my phone. If anyone so much as set foot on my porch without my permission, I would know. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. My house was locked down, my walls were mine again, and if my family thought they could waltz back in, they were in for a rude awakening. I thought that would be the end of it. But I was wrong. The real test came just days later when I caught my own brother on camera, trying to break into my house with a crowbar. The sight made my stomach twist, my own brother, standing on my porch in broad daylight, gripping a crowbar like some stranger trying to rob me. The alarm was blaring, the strobe lights flashing, and still, he jammed the metal into the doorframe, grunting as he tried to pry it open. I sat frozen at my desk for a moment, staring at the live feed on my phone. It didn't feel real. This was Jack, the same kid I used to build forts with in the backyard, the brother who once cried when he scraped his knee and begged me not to tell Mom. And now here he was, trying to break into my house like a criminal. My first instinct was to call him, to yell at him through the phone and make him stop. But then I realized if he was desperate enough to show up with a crowbar, desperate enough to ignore an alarm that could wake the neighborhood, then words weren't going to fix this. I saved the footage immediately, downloading it to my phone and then to my computer. If Jack thought this was going to be brushed under the rug, he was sorely mistaken. Just as quickly as he had started, he gave up. The alarm was deafening, neighbors were starting to peek out from behind their curtains, and Jack panicked. He threw the crowbar down onto the porch, bolted to his SUV, and sped off like a coward. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my steering wheel, but I left work right then. I drove straight to the police station and walked up to the front desk with my phone in hand. "I need to file a report," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For attempted breaking and entering." When I showed the officer the video, his expression said it all. Jack's face was crystal clear in the footage, the key in his hand, the crowbar in the other, the alarm shrieking. There was no denying what he had done. They took my statement, copied the footage, and promised to follow up. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, the phone rang. My mom's voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Emma, what have you done? The police came to our house and arrested Jack. How could you do this to your own brother?" I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. "Mom, he tried to break into my house, with a crowbar. I have it all on video. You could have handled this privately." She screamed. "You didn't have to destroy his life." "Maybe he shouldn't have tried to destroy mine," I snapped. She started sobbing, talking about how I was tearing the family apart, how I needed to fix this. Dad got on the line next, his tone more controlled but just as pressuring. "Emma, drop the charges. You know Jack isn't a bad guy. He's struggling. You'll regret this if you let it go too far." The irony nearly made me laugh. Regret? I regretted giving them keys. I regretted trusting them. What I didn't regret was protecting myself. Still, I wasn't heartless. I thought about it overnight, replaying the video again and again, each time feeling the sting of betrayal a little deeper. By morning, I knew what I'd do. I drove back to the police station and withdrew the complaint. Jack was released the same day, given nothing more than a warning. But the message had been delivered. He'd crossed a line, and I had shown him I wasn't afraid to defend myself even if it meant calling the cops on my own brother. And you know what? It worked. From that day forward, the calls, the texts, the manipulation, all of it stopped. No surprise visits, no guilt trips, no demands that I hand over my home. For the first time in months, I had silence. It wasn't peace born from reconciliation, it was peace born from finally drawing a line so sharp that even my family couldn't cross it. Jack walked out of that station with nothing more than a slap on the wrist, but the damage between us was permanent. I didn't even feel relief when they told me he'd been released. What I felt was clarity. My family had finally learned what I'd been trying to tell them for months. I wasn't a doormat, I wasn't their safety net, and my house was not, and never would be, their free ride. That night, my phone sat silent for the first time in weeks. No missed calls. No endless strings of texts begging or guilt-tripping. It was almost eerie, like the calm after a violent storm. But with every hour that passed, the silence felt less like absence and more like freedom. The days turned into weeks. Weeks into months, 6 whole months slipped by without a single word from my parents, Jack, or Sadie. At first, I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop for another knock at my door, another family dinner ambush, another surprise invasion. But nothing came. Instead, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. My house became more than just a place to sleep, it was my refuge. On Friday nights, I'd invite friends over, uncork a bottle of red wine, and laugh around my dining table without worrying about someone criticizing the paint on the walls. I planted tomatoes and herbs in the backyard, grilled burgers under string lights, and felt proud every time I pulled into the driveway knowing I had fought for this space. It wasn't just 4 walls, it was my independence, my line in the sand. Work was steady, too. I picked up new clients who valued my eye for design, and word of mouth kept projects rolling in. Sometimes I'd spend late evenings at my drafting table, sipping coffee and sketching, my dog curled up at my feet, and I'd think about how close I had come to losing all of this. Then one afternoon, I ran into my cousin Lauren at the grocery store. She gave me a big hug and said, "Emma, I've been meaning to call you. I heard Jack and Sadie moved in with your parents. Did you know Sadie's pregnant?" I froze, holding a box of pasta in my hands, and tried to keep my face neutral. Pregnant? Of course. Suddenly, their desperation, their entitlement, their panic, it all clicked. They hadn't just been fighting for a roof over their heads, they had been fighting to secure a future they couldn't build on their own. Lauren shook her head sympathetically. "Your mom says it's been rough. Jack's job still hasn't picked up, and now with a baby coming, it's even harder. But your parents are happy to help." I smiled faintly, said something polite, and steered the conversation back to lighter topics. But on the drive home, her words echoed in my head. Sadie was pregnant, Jack was still struggling. My parents had taken them in. And none of it was my problem. For a flicker of a second, guilt tried to creep in. But then I pictured my bedroom walls smeared with that horrible pink, my front door rattling under Jack's crowbar, my mother's voice screeching that I was destroying the family. No. I had done the only thing I could do. I had protected what was mine. And for once, I didn't care if that made me the villain in their story. Because in mine, it made me the hero. When I pulled into my driveway that night, bags of groceries in the back seat, I sat for a moment and just looked at my house. The porch light glowed warmly, the flower beds I'd planted in spring were in full bloom, and everything was exactly the way I had left it. That simple stability, the guarantee that no one had been inside moving furniture or slapping pink paint on my walls, felt priceless. I thought about what Lauren had told me in the grocery aisle. Sadie was expecting, Jack was still struggling to hold down steady work. And my parents, well, they had taken on the role I had refused, letting Jack and Sadie live under their roof. A younger version of me might have been eaten up by guilt, replaying my decisions and wondering if I had failed my family. But standing there, keys in my hand, I felt something else entirely, peace. For months, I had lived without chaos. I had cooked dinners in my kitchen without judgmental comments about my weird taste. I had hosted friends without worrying about someone rolling their eyes at my choices. I had taken weekend trips, driving 2 or 3 hours out of town, never once returning to find a mess left behind. That peace had been hard-earned, and I wasn't about to give it up. Of course, there were moments of weakness, quiet evenings, when I remembered the way things used to be before the fights, before the resentment. I'd think about Christmas mornings as kids, me and Jack opening stockings, while my mom poured hot cocoa. But then I'd remember the crowbar, the pink paint, the way Sadie had smirked as if my hard work was nothing but her stepping stone. Those memories hardened my resolve. Some people hear my story and shake their heads. They say, family is family, no matter what. But here's what I've learned: blood doesn't give someone the right to trample your boundaries. Being related doesn't mean you owe them your home, your money, or your sanity. I worked hard to buy this house. I worked even harder to turn it from a rundown mess into a place of beauty and comfort. That doesn't make me selfish, it makes me someone who values what she's earned. I know there are folks who would have caved, who would have let guilt steer them into sacrificing their own happiness. But I also know there are people, maybe even some reading this, who've been in my shoes. People who've been called selfish for saying no, people who've been made to feel guilty for protecting what's theirs. To those people, I'll say this: you are allowed to choose yourself. So yes, Jack and Sadie are living with my parents now, preparing to bring a baby into the world while my parents carry the financial load. And yes, there's a tiny part of me that worries what will happen down the line. But it's not my responsibility. I didn't create their problems, and I won't destroy myself trying to solve them. Every evening, when I unlock my front door, I feel a wave of pride and relief. This home is mine. My effort, my money, my choices built it, and I'll protect it for as long as I live. Even if it means losing relationships I once thought were unbreakable. Because at the end of the day, peace is worth more than keeping the illusion of family. And I'd make that choice again without hesitation. Real adulthood isn't just paying the mortgage, it's protecting the life you're building. This story reminds us that boundaries are not cruelty, they're maintenance, like replacing a leaky roof before it collapses. Say yes to hard work and long-term value, buying the ugly house, learning new skills, leaning on honest tradespeople, and say no to entitlement even when it comes dressed as family. Help is generous, rescue can become enabling. Put agreements in writing, keep control of your keys, and invest in basic safeguards, locks, cameras, documentation. When conflict comes, stay factual, not furious, evidence beats accusations, and calm follow-through beats shouting matches. Remember too that community matters. Neighbors, co-workers, and ethical contractors can be stronger allies than relatives who won't respect your no. Most of all, choose peace over approval. Many of us in midlife are juggling kids, aging parents, careers, and finances. We simply can't afford to let guilt hijack our homes or our sanity. You're allowed to build a future that fits your values, even if others disagree. Protect your time, your money, and your space, then enjoy them without apology. Peace is not selfish, it's the foundation that lets you show up as your best self for the people you love.